Well, thanks so much for tuning into the market wrap. Niraj Shah with Nickey Mirchandani. And maybe my producer is so excited about looking at the markets that maybe we should look at that indices straight away because it was really a strong day of trade, a bit of a bounce back day of trade. But mind you, not everything did well. Some of the stocks were fairly placid in the session. IT, for example, very flat. But it was a day of bounce for the stocks which had gotten hammered a lot earlier. So Bajaj Finserv up 7%. Remember, the Bajaj twins were at the receiving end yesterday. Tata Motors, Bajaj Finance is the other one, which is up about 5%. Very strong show there. Ahead of the day before the numbers, both these have bounced back. Tata Motors up about 5%. There's a lot of talk of maybe some fairly interesting large HNI investors name coming in the Tata Motors buying bulk deal today. Let's wait and watch if that happens. Commodities bounce back. Hindalco, JSW, Tata Steel, all of them were doing rather well for themselves. But Adani Ports was the other one, which is also doing very well for itself and went up about 3.5% up in the session today. Jefferies came out with a note citing that they believe that the promoters will deleverage and therefore the stock will do well. Well, what didn't do well was IT, as I said, Tech Mahindra, Wipro, HCL Tech, Infosys, almost everything stayed very, very quiet. So that was as far as the large cap action goes. What about the specific stocks in trade today, or one stock that stood out? Let's get in Nikki for that. Nikki, good afternoon to you. And what was the stock that stood out for you? I think Nikki's there, but Nikki can't hear me. Maybe Nikki can't hear me. But nevertheless, the point being that I think the stock that probably would have stood out today would have been, under all probability, in the large cap space at least, would have been Bajaj Finance before the results. What about the broader end of the spectrum? That's the other point that we should all look out for. So Indiabulls Real Estate, day after the numbers, up about 11%. There was strength in commodities by and large. So Hindustan Zinc did well. L&T Technology Services, I have the numbers, was up about 8%. L&T Finance Holdings, after getting clobbered in the session yesterday, up about 7%. Actually, viewers, that's been the order of the day today, isn't it? All NBFCs did really well. It was not just Bajaj Finance. Almost everything which had an NBFC flavor to it did really well for itself. Look at that. Cholamandalam Investment up about 7% as well. Finserv, we already spoke about. Indiabulls Housing Finance up 6%. So all that entire pocket came up. The numbers from Seat as well as the numbers for Seat were very good, and therefore Seat and Apollo Tyres also did very well for themselves. So those were the few names that did well. What didn't do well? Alo, down about 5.5. There was weakness in Indian hotels, so that one corrected. And of course, Abbott India and Persistent Systems were the others that kind of stayed soft in the session, down about 1% apiece for both of these. Mind you, the advanced decline ratio was very, very robust today. So it was a day of a super bounce for the Indian markets. What in the broader market stood out? Nikki, if you can hear me, what are the stocks at the broader end of the spectrum that really stood out in trade today?
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about L&T Finance Holding because that's one counter which did extremely well in trade today. Earlier part of the day, you did see some amount of gains coming in on the counter because of the strong show that the company registered. HSBC came up with a report on this counter and said that there was a strong operational beat, which was actually led by the growth in the rural business. Apart from that, the balance sheet strength also sustained, and the provisions of the non-stage 3 loans pretty much remained unchanged sequentially, which was also a positive going forward for the company. There was no negative surprise per se when it comes to the asset quality, and also the valuations largely factor in all sort of concerns that we have which relate to the growth. Apart from that, HSBC at this point of time has actually slashed FY21 to 23 estimated earnings to factor in the Q3 earnings at this point of time. But apart that, Niraj, I'd like to speak about Indiabulls Real Estate because that's one company which did extremely well in trade today. We saw solid set of numbers coming in from the company, at least yesterday, that the numbers came in after the market hours. The revenue was down by 41%. Despite that, you've seen the EBITDA uptick of nearly 3% for this counter on consolidated basis year on year. Margins expanded at 18% as compared to 10%. And of course, that's on account of the operational performance that you saw. That was mainly on account of cost efficiency because the company took some proactive steps to reduce the expenses from 200 crore that we saw in the entire financial year to less than 100 odd crore that we've seen so far in this financial year, because of which you've seen that solid gains coming in on this counter. But apart from that, what is interesting is Torrent Pharma, because Goldman Sachs has initiated a buy rating on this counter and the target price of nearly 3,400 rupees, which indicates a potential upside of nearly 28% for this counter. Betting on favorable exposure to branded generic market and sustainable pricing power, these are the key two reasons because of which Torrent Pharma is probably there is an initiation report on Torrent Pharma. Apart from that, there is an upside optionality that the brokerage sees from US market relaunch and a couple of pending approvals. At this point of time, clearly we've seen some amount of positive momentum building in for Torrent Pharma, which ended the day higher with gains of more than 5%. But then, Neeraj, coming back to you, any significant counter that you'd like to keep an eye out on?
I'd just like to tell viewers that if you've not watched the India versus Australia highlights and are watching this, please stop watching this and go back and watch those highlights. But yeah, nevertheless, I think everybody will be watching out for the results kickstarting, Nikki. Starting tomorrow, we have the index companies starting to come out with numbers. So the Bajaj twins would be definitely at top of everybody's mind, even though a part of the operational update is already known. What comes out of the asset quality from Bajaj Finance would be keenly watched out for, and then therefore FinServ. It's also an important week, Nikki, from the life insurance company's perspective, since FinServ and then HDFC Life and SBI Life come out with numbers. So that is something else. Anything else in the results? And of course, give us an update on how the world markets are doing, Nikki, because the US markets are starting trade after a day's hiatus.
Sure. In terms of earnings, I think on a Friday we like to watch out for, apart from the insurance company JSW Steel, and on a Saturday you have Ultratech Cement, which will be coming out with numbers. Those are the two Nifty 50 companies that we like to keep an eye out on. But apart from that, the global setup at this point of time looks extremely optimistic. European markets are trading positive. Well, at this point of time, they've almost turned negative. If you see, the screen is turned in red after some amount of optimism that we saw in the early part of the day. Clearly, all the gains have been wiped up. And if you look at the US stock futures, they also, to an extent, are trading mixed. Well, President-elect inauguration will be something which will be keeping an eye out on in the European markets. That's one bit of development which is taking place. And at this point of time, we're seeing slew of upbeat earnings reports coming in from Logitech, Rio Tinto. Both of them have reported good set of numbers. Probably early part of the gains were account on some amount of these upbeat earnings reports, which have rather augured well for the sentiment as a whole. But with this, it's a wrap. Thank you so much for watching.